Welcome to Living Transplant, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital and brings you open and honest conversations about the transplant experience. My name is Candice, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Center for Living Organ Donation. I'm also a kidney transplant recipient. This is where I developed my passion to support others in their journey to navigate the world of transplant. Full disclosure, I'm not a physician, and I'm not here to give you medical advice. Think of me as your guide through the world of transplant to educate, inspire, pique your curiosity, and fuel your passion. Living Transplant will show you the world of transplant like you've never seen it before. Welcome back to the Living Transplant podcast. Today, I'm joined by my friend Tamara. We will be discussing Tamara's personal journey with diabetes and her kidney pancreas transplant. Later, we will be joined by Dr. Sharon Bray, who is a writer and a workshop developer. And recently, we attended her Writing Your Transplant Story workshop, which was absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for co-hosting this episode with me, Tamara.
Thank you for having me, Candice.
So exciting.
Me too.
So I'm wondering if we can start way back in the beginning, and if you can tell me a little bit about what your life was like growing up in Jamaica.
Life in Jamaica was awesome. But that's where you were born. That's all your family and friends, like the environment, the warm, the friendly people, your school, your classmates, your neighbors, like everybody was so kind and caring towards you. Sometimes life wasn't always what you want it to be. You think of things when you look on the TV and you see people in other countries like Canada, the US, and you're wondering and wishing, oh, you'd like to be there someday. And you're always trying to do things like they do and trying to speak like they do. But it was always fun. I do miss my country. I loved every moment of being in Jamaica.
Talk to me a little bit about what it was like for you at the young age. You were enjoying your family and your friends and going to school, and then all of a sudden you find out that you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. That must have just been so scary and life-altering for somebody at your age.
It really was. I remember I graduated one high school, Jonathan Grant High School, and then I went on to a second high school, and it was at the beginning of the second high school, I started to feel really ill. And my mom would take me to the doctor where she would give me pills and say it's iron deficiency, but that's all. I took the pills, nothing changed. So she said, oh, I'm going to take you to the local clinic. I went there and they said, you have to take her to the hospital right away. Then when I went there, they said it was diabetes. What is diabetes? I didn't know. Because we call it sugar. And I only knew that as somebody who was older to have that kind of illness. And when they said that, I didn't know, like, why did I have it or how did I even get it? But I was admitted to the hospital immediately and they said I would have to start taking insulin. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the insulin, then the diabetes would go away. No problem. But when they said that you'd have to take it for the rest of your life, then I was like, no, I'm young. I'm a kid, go to school. What am I supposed to do? So at that point, life got tough. Life got hard. It wasn't like being a normal kid anymore. It was a kid with responsibilities. Like everything changed. Eating, going to school. Sometimes I even passed out in school.
Oh,
Yes. And it was hard. At that point, it was hard.
and so how did you manage diabetes at such a young age?
You know what? my grandparents, my grandma, she was a rock. Yeah, and my mom and my sister was the bravest of all because she had to come to the hospital to learn how to give insulin so she could help me if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
And I would often like, can you give me my insulin, please? She said, do it yourself. So I can't even look, just do it. And
Oh,
then she would do it like every single day, religiously, at every time I'm supposed to get insulin. I would have to call my sister and she would do it.
wow.
Yeah, but there was a little difficulty with eating because even though life was nice and all of that, we didn't have it like to be spending extra money to cook extra food. And because I was the only one in that household with diabetes. So diet would have to change and it wasn't always easy. It ended up so that I had to eat what was cooked. At that point, like I wasn't on a proper diet. I just took insulin and still ate whatever was being cooked. That's what we could afford.
Okay. And
Yes.
so your sister, did she learn how to balance the food and your numbers and your insulin? Was she really monumental in kind of keeping you healthy at that time?
No, she wasn't. I was the one that was taught how to do the numbers,
Okay.
but they taught me how to do the insulin myself. But they said just in case anything happened, there had to be someone else. But she was taught how to do it on an orange. She learned on an orange and then she practiced on me.
That's
And
fantastic. And so I'm guessing at some point you took over giving yourself those shots?
I did. When I got older and she couldn't, she's like, no, I'm not going to keep sticking you in the butt, your belly, your arms.
Yeah.
Love. She said, you don't know how to do it? I'm like, yes, I can, but I just want you to do it. I just can't look at me sticking myself. She's like, well, you're going to have to learn someday. And she just said, do it. And I ended up taking over myself.
Wow.
And when I met my husband, he took over. So it wasn't like something I really liked doing. I know I had to.
Yeah.
I ended up doing it for a long while by myself.
And so you bring up your husband. When did you meet your husband?
I met my husband in 2008.
2008.
2008. I came to Canada 2007. We met in 2008 and we got married in 2010.
So through that time, you had immigrated to Canada after the birth of your daughter.
Yes, I had a daughter back in Jamaica. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, when I came to Canada, I had to leave her for a little while. But
Wow.
she understood and eventually everything worked out and she came soon after.
That's fantastic. And you met your husband and you two got married
Yes, we
and you had a beautiful son
did.
after that as well. So your husband also had a son as well. So you had this beautiful blended family together.
Blended family. The son is older, my daughter is in the middle, and our son is
The last.
and everybody gets along real well.
That's amazing. And so with that family dynamic, did they learn about your diabetes and about your disease?
Yes, they did. My daughter knew before. Yeah, when I had my daughter, they took her away to be examined because I was a diabetic mother. And they kept her for a while to check her out if she had any diabetes or if anything was wrong with her. Was a little bit underweight, but that was it. No diabetes. I was so happy.
Yeah.
She was good and she still is good. Mhm.
Amazing.
So is my son.
That's fantastic. So they had a wonderful blending of your family, and you have this great big family now in Canada, and you've learned to manage your diabetes at this point. And then at some point, your health started to decline again. And so, what happened at that point?
Let me see, I was pregnant and I lost the baby at 7 months.
Wow.
They said they don't know why, but there was just no heartbeat. So I lost the baby, and yeah, after I lost the baby, then just a minute.
Take your time. So sorry, Tamara.
Yeah. Yeah. After I lost the baby, then the doctors said to me, we think your diabetes and high blood pressure may have been a source as to what caused this miscarriage, but they weren't sure. So they're like, we think you should wait before you like get pregnant again. But it so happened that I did get pregnant again about a year later. And my son was fine and everything, but throughout the pregnancy, I was sick. I was like, I was so swollen, more than the average pregnant mother. I was so swollen, and the diabetes was like going crazy, like up this minute, low the next minute. And it was like just back and forth. And the blood pressure was so high and it was crazy. So they said the last visit I made to the doctor, he said, if you carry on like this, then we're going to lose you and we're going to lose the baby. So we have to take the baby. So I said, okay. I went to Mount Sinai. They said, you're not able to deliver naturally, so we're going to have to give you a C-section. So I'm like, okay. So I had the baby. He was fine. He was a little bit underweight, but he was good. But I wasn't good.
Yeah.
I don't know. I got an epidural, and the puncture wound that I got started leaking.
Oh, my goodness.
It was leaking so bad that I had to be changing gowns, and they had to be putting pads at the back of my back and then changing the sheets. And the doctors didn't know why I was leaking so much. But it stopped after a few days. And then I came home with my baby and everything was fine. And I went for a couple of checkups, and they said, unfortunately, your kidney function doesn't look good. It seems like it's going down. It's at, I think, 35%. And if it goes any lower, we'll have to put you on dialysis. It got lower, and they're like, we have to move right away. So they showed me what to do. I went in to get the catheter in and stuff. It was peritoneal dialysis at first that I did at home at nights because I had to go to school in the morning. I was going to George Brown.
So you're going to George Brown. You
Yes.
have a new baby, a daughter at home, and you're now starting peritoneal dialysis while having diabetes as well.
I did my dialysis at nights, and in the morning, I would rush off to school and come back home and do the same thing. But my husband would get home before me, and he would start dinner and do his stuff until one evening, I started complaining of headaches. So he said, just go take a shower, wash off, and see if you'll feel a little bit better. I went into the shower and then I started to call him and tell him that I can't see. He's like, "What do you mean you can't see?" So he came in the washroom and got me and realized that I was feeling around saying I can't see. So that got him really nervous now. So he took me to the hospital.
Of course.
Yeah. And they said it was getting late. And they said, "We have to run some tests on her. And I don't think we're going to let her out because she doesn't look good. I think her diabetes is very high and the blood pressure is also very high." And he said before he left me at the hospital, I was curled up in a ball in the fetal position. And he was scared to leave me, but he left the kids at home. So he left me for the night and he came home.
At that point, you have no idea what happened to you,
Oh, I did.
and your eyesight is completely gone at this point.
It was going and coming.
Wow.
Diabetes, it affects every organ in your, it started with my eyes. Up to this day, I'm still getting injections in my eyes. Yeah, it affects everything if it's not taken care of.
So you're in hospital and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Were they able to find the source of what happened?
The night that I went in, they actually called my husband the following morning saying that he needs to come right away because I was having seizures. I've never had seizures before.
Oh my goodness.
I was having seizures, and when he came, he said they were giving me chest compressions and I had a heart attack. I don't know. It's mind blowing to me. In my report, it says I was resuscitated 52 times. I
52
don't even,
times.
yeah, I have no idea how that happens and how I'm still here.
Somebody wanted to keep you here, obviously.
Obviously, and I'm glad I'm,
Yeah.
yeah. There was a lot of things that happened in their hospital that only he can tell me about because he was there every minute of the day, every day that I was there.
And at this point, you're not knowing what's going on. You're in a coma at this point.
Yes, I was in the ICU for 8 weeks, 2 months.
Wow.
I was in the ICU. And sometimes when he tells me some things, it's what he remembers because he doesn't remember them straight out. But he'd tell me things and I'd like, "I did that? That happened?" He would say yes, because I have no idea. Yes. So I was in there in the hospital for a total of 4 months.
And so you woke up from your coma, not knowing that any of this has happened, and you've gone through all of these incredible traumas to your body, and your family is hoping and praying that you come out of this. And so you do, but you wake up on hemodialysis now.
Yes. I didn't even know when they changed me from the PD to hemodialysis. I guess it was easier to do it in the hospital. But when I asked what was this thing in my chest,
Yeah.
they explained to me that we had to change your dialysis because you're in the hospital now. And this is the easiest way to get it done. And I think that they thought it was the best type of dialysis at that time too.
And so when you woke up, what were you thinking? Did you go from remembering trying to find your way out of the shower to missing that part of what happened?
I have no idea. I remember the headache and going in the shower and going to the hospital that night. I think that was it. I don't remember anymore. I remember when I woke up though, my husband was there and I was asking like, "Who are you?" I was, "What?" Yeah, because they told me that I wasn't going to be able to remember anything at all. Not even as a child. I wouldn't be able to remember to be able to function.
And so when did that start coming back?
I would say maybe a couple weeks after. It didn't take a long time. Yeah.
And so was that bits and pieces that started to come back into place, or did it all come at once?
It all came back. It all came back. I know when I left the hospital, this was in February, the end of January, February, and we had bought new furniture in December. So when I came out of the hospital and came home, I was like, this is where I live. Where did these come from? Because I didn't remember that we had gotten new stuff.
So it was like coming home to a new place. You went through this incredible journey in the hospital that your husband was running back and forth between your children and checking up on you and making sure you were okay. How did he manage through that time?
There were two persons that spoke to him. One was the gentleman that lives downstairs. He said to him, they call him Robbie sometimes. He said, Robbie, you can't do this. Running from work, going to your wife at the hospital, and the children you're at home. You're going to run down yourself. And he said, you know what? You're right. He left his job. He said, I have to look after my family. Next person that spoke to him was a doctor at the hospital. The doctor took him aside and he said, I know you love your wife and you're here every single day. We all know you. But you have to take care of yourself, or else you're going to get sick. You won't be able to take care of her, and you won't be able to take care of your kids. So he slowed down just a little bit. He didn't slow down a lot, but he kind of slowed down a little.
And I think that is very good advice for caregivers through their journey is you can't take care of someone else if you can't take care of yourself first. And I find that with my mom, she was helping take care of me. Like your husband learned about peritoneal dialysis, my mom did the same. She was supporting me while I was doing my peritoneal dialysis. So she learned all about the machine and she was bringing me back and forth from appointments and my dialysis in center. And at the time, my grandmother was living with MS, with multiple sclerosis. And so she had a lot of appointments as well. And to take care of yourself as a caregiver is so difficult because you are that core person for the one who is sick and you want to do everything to make sure that they're okay. But if you're not okay yourself, you can't take care of that person.
Yes.
And I think that's so important. And I think it's one of the most difficult things for somebody who's caring for a loved one to realize is that they do have to take that time to make sure they're healthy too. So you finally are back home. You're able to get home. And at this point, are you doing in-center hemodialysis now?
Yes, I had to go to the hospital 3 days per week. And I was using a walker at that time because I couldn't walk by myself. Yeah, I had to learn to walk again. My legs were so weak. Even now, walking is a problem for me to go upstairs, and it's a problem, but my legs were so weak. I came out of the hospital in a wheelchair. I had to use a wheelchair back and forth to dialysis for a while until I moved on to a walker. And then I moved on to a cane.
And so how long was that you were not able to have strength in your legs to walk on your own?
I was practicing daily, but it was very difficult. Everything was for a couple of months. The wheelchair was like about a month. But the walker, it was like maybe 3 months. And then to the cane, it was like I used it if I had to go for a walk in the hallway just to exercise or anything like that. I would take my cane with me.
Wow.
Yeah, everything was for a couple of months before I regained strength. And as I said before, the strength still isn't there. To go upstairs, I have to hold on and pull myself up. It's it's still bad, but I'm still fighting.
And that's the thing. Everything that I hear from you is you fight so hard and you're so strong and you've gotten through things that most people could never imagine that they would ever face one of them. What keeps you going? And what kept you pushing forward and kept you positive and strong through all of that?
I pray a lot, and I prayed a lot until I met my husband. I started praying more because we believe in God, and what we pray for are good things and healing and strength.
Mm.
And I believe that God hears and he sees where we need help and he steps in. And I don't think I, I could have made it without God giving me the strength and giving my husband the strength. Like he knew nothing about anything. And I think that with me just telling him wasn't enough. It's like he hears the voice say, listen, you need to do this. You need to be strong. You need to, and that gives him the extra push to go ahead that he needs to. And I love my family so much. I love my kids. I love their, I can't say stepson. I have to say son. An older uh, person, not older person, but he's not a young kid. But I have to say he's still my son and he has a daughter. And now I'm a grandma and she loves her pop-up. And we are just so blessed to have found each other. And they keep me strong. I love my mom is still alive. My father is still alive and my grandparents, all my uncles and aunties. We now have a reading from one of our workshops participant, Elena. Go ahead.
Hope is a process. You spend a lot of time at night. You live with it, but hope for more. Hope is latching onto a small star that may become a bigger star, that may become a moon, illuminating the evening, searching for the fireflies and lanterns. Occasionally you'll see them. You'll want the sun to rise, but you won't need it. You'll just hope, dancing among the stars, by yourself, feeling the pain of separation, the blue of distance, the gravity, trying to keep your head down. It's trying that gives you hope to try back. Hope that one day you'll not feel so hesitant to open up.
And now, welcome back to the show. You're on this journey of hemodialysis and you've gotten home and you've gotten to a place where you're stable now. When did the discussion even about transplant come up?
It was one day at dialysis where I think she was a transplant coordinator. All of this was at Humber River Hospital,
Okay.
and they referred me to Toronto General, and that, that saved my life. But she told me about the transplant program, and I'm like, I'm very interested, but what are my chances? And she's like, you have to go on a list. I'm like, okay, a list. If I go on now, I'm going to be at the bottom, but okay, put me at the bottom. It's fine as long as I'm on the list. And I was on the list. Shortly after I came out of the hospital, I got a call. I'm like, can it work so fast? But when I went to the hospital and I did my checkup and stuff, they were like, no, I'm sorry, you're too weak and things aren't stable with your body. And I'm like, totally understand. I'm not going to say I wasn't disappointed,
Of course.
but I do understand because after all that I've been through in the hospital, I still wasn't able to function properly on my own as yet. So I do understand what they said. My body wasn't strong enough. That was it. Went back, continued doing my dialysis. I think it was about another year or so. I got another call. But this time they said, we have a kidney. I was being worked up for a kidney and a pancreas. So they said, I have a kidney. Would you want to get the kidney? And then later on, when we find a pancreas, then you get another transplant. I'm like, I've been through a lot and I know pain, but that doesn't mean I like pain. So that would be two surgeries. I'm like, oh, I didn't want to say no, but I'm like,
Right.
if I say no, would it mean that I don't want to get a transplant? But I was going around and she's like, it's okay. You can say no. We understand if you want to do both at once. And I said, okay, that's made me feel much better.
Yeah.
Rather do both at once.
So doing both at once, what does that do for you if you were to get a kidney and a pancreas?
It would mean that I would have one surgery. And it would also mean that no more dialysis, no more diabetes.
Wow.
And yeah, because since the initial state of having diabetes, I've been on insulin for it was about 25 years. I've been on insulin until the third call. They got worked up and everything, and they're like, you're good to go. I'm like,
Wow.
everything is good? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, whoa, it's finally gonna happen. And that day when I got the transplant, the day before was the last day I took insulin after 20 plus years. Such a relief.
That's incredible. And so you go through the transplant, you get a kidney and a pancreas, and it's a successful transplant.
It was successful. I woke up and I was smiling. I was in pain, but I opened my eyes. And when the nurse said everything went well, oh my gosh. And then when they check your urine bag, I'm like, is that my pee? When you're on dialysis, you don't do that. You can't pee. And I was on dialysis for 5 years. Is that all mine? And she's like, yes. I've never been so excited to see my pee before.
What I always say is liquid gold.
My goodness, it was so exciting.
That's incredible. And it's funny thinking about those huge moments for us as dialysis patients, that pee is just something that happens and just comes out of people's bodies until it doesn't work anymore for us. And having to have fluid removed on dialysis and live with liquid restrictions and all of those things that we go through, to wake up and see a bag hanging off of your bed full of urine is
Oh my goodness.
a cause for celebration.
That was awesome to see that.
Wow. And so, other than your pee, how did you feel that day seeing your husband and knowing that this was the end of your dialysis journey?
It felt so good.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that you can't describe, like that feeling like a weight has been lifted.
Mm.
Candice, you don't know how, there's not enough words to say how you feel, how you felt before to how you're feeling now, and know that your life is going to be changed forever now for the better.
Hmm.
You're looking like before you were looking, but you didn't know where you were going. You were just looking ahead. But now you can actually look ahead and see which way do I want to go?
Right.
Which way do I choose to go? You could only go one way straight. But you have multiple ways. Which way do you want to go? You can go anywhere you want to go. Like, it's awesome. It was
And so one of my favorite things to ask people, especially since you were diabetic and on dialysis, did you have a food that you ate right away that you were so excited to eat post-transplant?
what, Candice? I ate everything. I ate everything. There was no partial. Like I just ate. And then when I had enough, I'm like, that's okay. It's okay.
Amazing.
I'm
I ate a lot of chili post-transplant. We couldn't have tomatoes and beef is salty and no beans or lentils. And so like a bowl of chili was basically like everything you shouldn't eat on dialysis. My husband was laughing because once I got home, I made giant things of chili, like huge big pots that would feed a high school football team. And I would just keep doing it. And I did it for about 3 weeks. I just ate so much chili because I was like, these are all the things I couldn't eat before. And now I can. I have the to do
still,
this.
I know.
And it's incredible. Like you said, there's no words to describe what it feels like to have that opportunity now in front of us and that freedom and being disconnected from a machine and knowing that you no longer literally have a tube that's connecting you to a machine to
That's true.
keep you alive. It's incredible.
It's an incredible feeling. You feel so free. So so good.
Absolute joy. And I know you went through the process of eventually writing a letter to your donor family. How did that process go for you?
It took me a while. It took me a while because you don't get much information about the person whose organs you get. But what I did know was that I got both organs from the same person. So
Wow.
that would have mean that the person was deceased. And I felt happy knowing that I'm alive, but sad that a person had to die. And that it set me back a bit. It took me a while before I could write that letter uh, because I don't know if writing that letter would make the donor's family bring up back memories or maybe say that, oh, they don't want the letter because you're alive, but my family's dead, or I don't know, any resentment. I didn't want to stir any feelings that they were trying to, or if they had gotten over it, bring it back up. I tried many times and I put it away. It didn't take a lot of convincing, but it was one day on our ACD YouTube channel program that we spoke about it. And I said that I wanted to write it, but I didn't have the courage. And then you guys told me about some of the stories, and that gave me a little bit of confidence. And I did write that letter and I did send it off. And I feel relieved that I did. I am not disappointed that I did, and I'm not disappointed that I didn't hear back because whether they choose to or not, I just want them to know how grateful I am.
Mhm.
And once they know that, that's important to me. I just want to tell them thank you and thank you for giving me a second chance. And thank you for your kind donation and how much it has affected me and given me so much more. And I just wanted to say thank you to them.
Amazing. That's incredible. Please now enjoy a reading from one of our workshop participants, Sheila.
Hope for a transplant. Hope on angels' wings. Sacred vessels join. The gift. Ways of meeting you.
And now, welcome back to the show. I know that for a lot of us, writing our story about what happened can be really difficult, and it's often hard for us to even know where to start. And we were able to attend, the two of us, writing your transplant story workshop that helped kickstart that journey for the two of us. And I'd like to ask Sharon to join us.
Tamara, what a story. What a story. Wow. I'm just humbled.
Thank you so much.
It is our great pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Sharon Bray, who was our fearless writing leader. Sharon is a writer, educator, and author of 2 books on the benefit of expressive writing during cancer, as well as personal essays, a children's book, magazines, and the occasional poetry. Sharon was the one who led us in our workshop for writing your transplant story, which Tamara and I participated in. And we were very lucky to be joined by several other women in the group who were both donors and recipients. And throughout that process, we were transformed by the power of writing. And we're so grateful that we have Sharon here today to join us. So thank you. Welcome, Sharon.
So much. I appreciate being here. And I also have to say I appreciated very much being able to lead a group for transplant patients and recipients, because it was a new aspect of illness and health that I had not been acquainted with before. And it was inspirational and humbling at once. So I'm so happy that I was part of this.
Sharon, can you talk to us a little bit about your personal journey and what brought you to writing?
I can, but understand I have to go back many years.
We're with you.
Okay. It was a long time ago in the dawn of time, but I've pretty much written since I was a kid. I got in the habit of carrying a little notebook with me, one of those cheap little spiral bound, small. I like to write in purple ink in my early years. And my writing was I was a very contemplative kid. And my writing was a place for me to record deep thoughts. I was exploring myself growing up. I was exploring what I believed in and why. And it just became a very important thing for me. I didn't share it with anybody. It was just mine. And that was the beginning. I turned to writing in earnest again several years later, when my first husband died suddenly in a drowning accident. And suddenly I found myself mother of 2 children. I was back in graduate school earning a doctorate, and my whole world changed.
Goodness.
And I began to fill journals. They were an important aspect of release, of making sense of the experience, but also I was protecting my children with their grief. And for me to show a mixture of feelings, and I had them, believe me, I was angry at times because the death was an unnecessary accident. I was full of grief that I couldn't express to the girls because they were already suffering so much. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And it was the very best thing I did for myself up to a point. One of the things I say to people, and all the research on expressive writing says this too, when writing is healing, if you find yourself ruminating, going down the same rabbit hole, and I started to, of course, replay the same questions that were unanswerable over and over, I started feeling worse. And so, of course, I didn't think it was me. I thought it was my daughter's grief. So I took them off to a child psychologist who played with them, met with us, watched me in action with them, and finally delivered the verdict, which was the girls are fine. They're grieving, need to grieve. Your parenting skills are good. And I said, why do I feel so bad? And he said, I think mommy needs to talk.
Yeah.
So mommy finally did start talking with a therapist for 2 years, but I continued
Wow.
to write during therapy. I started writing poems about what I thought was a therapeutic relationship, but of course it was about my relationship with my husband, life to death. And so I found that my writing began to take a shape. I started writing poetry. I didn't just free write all the time. I had other ways that I started to express the experience. And I've written ever since. I write every morning. It's an act of meditation. It's an act of release. It's my spiritual activity.
Incredible.
Wow.
And that must have been such a whirlwind for you of it's not a disease diagnosis, but it almost feels like a similar situation where you're smacked in the face with something that was not supposed to happen. And now you are being put through a situation that you have to deal with, and you can't just survive. You have to be a mother to your daughters and make sure that they're okay and their lives can continue. And often I find mothers put their children before themselves. And so with the writing, outside of writing, what else did you do to keep yourself afloat during those years?
I did the things I love most, and I sort of spared no expense. What I had in my budget for the doctoral work at that point was limited, but I took the girls to concerts. I took them to ballet. I enrolled them in dance lessons. And next thing I knew, I enrolled in dance lessons at their dance school. And I danced in the dance show too. And we did a lot of this kind of activity. Teenage years were hard because some of that anger, and it was directed at me, of course. I was the only surviving parent, had nowhere to go. But we made it through it, and I'm happy to say that both my daughters are mothers, accomplished, and I think all the better in their relationships with other people because of what they went through. They still remember their father with a mixture of great love and sorrow, but I remarried about 9 years later, and John had never had children, and it was interesting between the three of them, how they worked out the relationship. There's some pretty comic moments, but it's developed into a wonderful relationship. He loves them dearly. They love him dearly, and who could ask for more? My younger daughter danced all through into her early adulthood. She did classical ballet, she did jazz. She was very talented and then danced professionally in a salsa group. They did acrobatic things I don't even want to think about. I'm sure it ruined her body. She now can't dance, but it was just joyful activity for us. Friends would come over to dinner and we'd have routines.
Amazing.
We laughed a lot. Humor is one of the things that laughter is important to me. And not contrived jokes, but just naturally bubbling up out of just everyday life. And they both have a great sense of humor.
That's nice. That's good. Sharon, why do you think that writing is healing? And do you know of any research that backs that up?
Personally, just in terms of what I told you, I understood that writing was at the very least therapeutic. Not all writing, however, is healing, and I'll talk a little bit about that. What inspired me was back in 2000, early 2000, I was diagnosed with very early stage cancer, very treatable. But at the time, I was an unhappy executive. I was miserable in what I was doing. And in some ways, I feel like cancer saved me. It's a crazy thing to say, perhaps, except that I'd gone to see the radiologist and he'd asked what I was doing for myself. Because I was talking about, I'm trying to downsize an organization and my daughters and did. And he stopped me and he put his hand on my knee and he said, Sharon, I think you need to take care of yourself. It was almost a repeat from the child psychologist from many years before saying, you need to take care of yourself. I started back to the office and I pulled off the freeway midway, called the chairman of the board for the organization I was managing and said, I'm resigning. I said, if I don't, I can't save this organization. I said, but if I don't stop and take care of myself, I can't save myself.
Wow.
And so that summer, I immersed myself in writing. And what I discovered and what happened was I took a role as an interim executive director of a cancer group, a cancer support group. And someone put a magazine on my desk, Ma'am magazine, I remember. And I opened it and found an article by a psychologist named James Pennebaker, University of Texas at Austin. He was doing research, significant research on the healing aspects of writing. And what brought him to that was his own personal experience. But subsequently, he did experiments with the college students he was teaching, and then gradually it took hold. And now other populations, cancer patients, heart patients, arthritis patients, children with cancer, Vietnam vets, Iran vets, it goes on, studying the impact of what he called expressive writing. That's 30 plus years ago that he started that research. There's a significant body of research that supports the healing benefits of what he termed expressive writing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say not all writing is healing. What is expressive writing? It's pretty specific. It's writing about your deepest feelings and thoughts. It's about telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's about writing freely. You don't go back and edit and do those things. It's simply a release. And in that way, it's very much like talk therapy, more Rogerian perhaps than other therapies. To simply be able to express and dump it on the page. The page does not talk back to you by saying, yeah, that you're using too many of the same action verbs. It doesn't say that. It simply says, okay, let me have it. It's up to you to read it over. I ask when I work with writing groups, I recommend that people read over what they've written later, underline phrases and words that stand out, and use those as triggers to writing the next day or the day after that. But expressive writing is really writing therapy. That research is fascinating. I will say I haven't found, because I went searching when I found out I was leading the transplant group. I have not found much in the way of expressive writing experiments done with transplant patients. I think that's one of the areas where probably there could be some more.
Amazing. And after seeing that magazine and reading about that research, is that what prompted you to
Yes.
start these workshops?
All the lights went on. All of the lights
Oh.
went on. My love of writing, my educational background and training, my teaching, and my desire that I've had ever since I was a kid, writing big, deep thoughts, is to do meaningful work. Managing an organization for me was not meaningful work. It is for some, not for me. When I was in grade 6, I thought I would be a minister.
Wow.
When I grew up, there weren't many women in the field in terms of the Protestant world, I know that, but I thought that's what I want to do. But it's that spiritual side of me that needed to be expressed. I just felt like I was being called, vocare, a vocation. This was work I wanted to do. And shortly after I finished my cancer treatment, I proposed to the new director of the cancer organization I'd been covering for to let me try an experiment. Was simply, I said, free, I don't charge. I would like to lead a writing group for breast cancer patients. And that was 2001, and I have never stopped since. I still lead groups for cancer patients, and I think it's important for me to come at this work with lived experience of serious illness. And I came with cancer, and then I'm a heart patient. I also, the last 3 years have been, I started through Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, the same expressive writing group for heart patients, and now Transplant. So it's been 21 years of just absolute joy in what I do. I never get tired of it. The stories always inspire me. I'm always humbled by them. I learn things about myself just in the way I react to those stories as well. Just like when I've taught grade school back in the dawn of time, my kids were my greatest teachers. And my work has changed in the way that I do certain things. Not because anybody told me I should change. It's because when you're doing this work, you're in constant dialogue with the people in the group, their stories, their needs. And it has to be relevant to that group. There's no prescription. My workshops don't have I don't have a curriculum. I have 1,000 ideas that I pull from depending what the makeup of the group is, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Sharon, your chronic illness that you had, how do you think that it helped you to navigate through this world and with your writing experience?
I think one of the things I understood when I began to write, and perhaps it was more about the experience of writing when my husband died than it was about the cancer experience. Because once I started leading groups, it's a constant dialogue. I reflect on the group, also on my own experience and on the writing itself. So it's when I did my doctorate, I was looking at the thinking that instructors did during instruction. And I modeled the work after Donald Schoen's work on reflective practice, which I still have that weather-beaten book on my shelves all these years later. But that's how we grow expertise. Expertise is through reflection. It's a constant dialogue between yourself and your work, yourself and your work. And so when I would write for myself, I would reread it. I would notice things that surprised me in it. I would notice other things that seemed to be quite trivial. I would stumble into insight if you like. And that was the big healing aspect for me. And now I do the same process with my work. As I said, so much depends on the group. And whatever the group is going through, I think about that. I choose the prompts, the exercises. I go back. More things come out of the group. I might shift gears completely, depending on what I'm hearing and feeling and sensing in the group. It's a constant interaction for me.
One thing that I found very difficult to write about, which I wasn't expecting to happen during our series, was when you asked us to simply write about the experience of waiting. And for me, that was such a heavy space that I lived in when I went from my diagnosis to transplant. That was my waiting space. And it was a very difficult place to go back to. And I didn't expect that to happen during our series.
Now we'll have another reading from Candice's mom. Her name is Kim. Go ahead, Kim.
Waiting is brutal. Your mind can run amok. Is everything going to work out? Each test was one step closer to giving my daughter a kidney, one step closer to freedom for my precious daughter who had been stuck to a machine for the past year. Waiting taught me to trust in divine timing. It taught me patience and knowing. I had a knowing deep in me that all was going to work out the way it did. God only knows what would have happened if it didn't. We are so lucky. Lucky we were a fabulous match, lucky she's free. Waiting is such a difficult time, but would we be this grateful without the wait? Maybe waiting helps us to process the actual event as we wait. Waiting creates faith or fear, probably a bit of both. Waiting is trying to stay in the present, hold hope for the future, but try not to let the future take away this day we've been given. Waiting is not the same for the patient and the donor. She had to wait for the freedom from a machine. I was waiting for confirmation of what I already knew. Our bodies were built for this exchange, and waiting was part of the process. The wait at times was bearable because we'd talk about life after dialysis, dreams, the future, travel plans, swimming without a tube, no more dumping into a gas bucket. The wait was a story that we were writing. In the wait, everything was possible. The wait was difficult for our whole family. They had to wait for 2 of their loved ones to come through a transplant. I can only imagine the wait our family experienced. At least we were together in the wait.
And now, welcome back to the show. Do you find that those hardships that people go through really help to breed creativity?
I think we have a lot of literary evidence about that. Henry James, English novelist when back in the 1800s, said once that every writer begins from a port of pain.
Oh, wow.
And William Carlos Williams, the American doctor who practiced up until about the 1950s, was also a poet. But he also talked about the way writing begins, out of illness and stress. If you read poetry, anybody in my group knows that I love poetry, but it's a shorthand way to emotion. Where did the poets get that inspiration? Not by sitting and observing others, but it starts here first. It starts in the heart. It starts in one's own experience. And out of that, we surprise ourselves. I hear extraordinary writing in these groups from people who will say to me at the beginning of the group, I don't really write, because we have this notion that writing is about genius and novels, poetry and creativity. It's not. It's about expression. It's about telling the truth of your experience. It's writing from the heart and the soul. And anyone can write and say something absolutely beautiful. Anyone. That's my philosophy anyway.
Mm-hmm. So, what would be your advice to maybe just anyone who wants to start writing.
Spend time choosing a notebook that you really like. That's one for me.
Special color ink.
And even your color ink. I no longer write in purple, but I have to say I much prefer black ink over blue. It just happened. And a certain kind of pen that I use. You can get your little fetishes about your writing. The point is, this is important work. It's your story, your feelings, your experiences. And maybe you will write the great Canadian novel. Maybe you will write a blockbuster memoir, but that's not why you write, not initially. You write to hear yourself. You write to free up all the possibilities for self-expression and beauty, I think, that we all have in us. You notice not just things in yourself, but I notice things that absolutely take my breath away just looking out the window sometimes. And that can be a prompt. You can get up in the morning, you've got the same old coffee cup you've had for 30 years. It's got a crack in it, but you love this thing. That coffee cup has stories. Tell them. So I think I lost track of your question, Tamara.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Great answer to what I asked.
Good.
Yeah.
I have such enthusiasm, I get carried away.
That's what we love. That's what we love about Sharon. Yeah. And you spoke to something that I always wonder as well before I started our workshop was how do I start? Like, what is the prompt that, if I sit down in the morning, like you say, every morning you write, and before this workshop, it seemed like such a scary thing to do because you have a blank page in front of you, whether it's on the computer or if it's in a notebook, and thinking about just that first word is hard for people. And so you've given us some examples, but do you have any more examples for people to prompt just to get things flowing and to start before they even think about writing their transplant story or writing about themselves?
One of my favorite poets, William Stafford, had very simple advice for writing. He defined a writer as a writer is someone who writes, period. But he talked every morning. He would get up at 3 a.m. and he accomplished incredible volumes of poetry that are so down to earth and accessible and wonderful. But that you just say, oh, he was such a wise man. But he would get up every morning at 3 a.m. and go into his study and lie back on his sofa. And he talked about laying a line across the page and then following it. When I get up in the morning and I start writing, the elaborate ritual, I make my coffee fresh ground. I have all these things in place. The dog is at my feet. We're ready. Okay, ready, camera, start writing. But I just start somewhere. And it doesn't really matter where. I can start with the weather, or I very often start with the first thing in the morning is to write a haiku, which I had you folks write. 17 simple syllables, 3 lines that just says, here's where I am today. Here's what I'm noticing today. That will take me into myself. But if you're absolutely at a loss for anything to write, there's a bazillion, all you need is a prompt. And I recommend if you're writing from prompts that you use a timer and you commit to when the timer starts, you start writing anything. And you keep that pen moving until the timer goes off. That happens when you're under pressure. With the timer is you just start writing and you don't know what you say. Go back, read it. There will be nuggets in there that now become your own prompt for writing. But I have a bazillion prompts. Where have they come from? They've I started with some that I got from one or two writers I loved or studied with and their prompts, but very quickly, because I was now doing a slightly different kind of writing with people going through life-threatening diseases, it began to change. Where my prompts have come from is from the group, from understanding their experience and waiting for transplant patients. Huge. And there's so much in that story of waiting. Diagnosis is another one. Hearing for the first time, as Tamara told us in her story, you need a transplant. You have cancer. Guess what, Sharon? Your heart's failing. The shock of that. Yes, we know we aren't going to live forever, but suddenly it's, wait a minute, I'm not ready. Not now. And out of that experience is extraordinary writing. The emotions of it, the experience of it, the medical experience, writing about that, having the freedom, if you have bad experiences with physicians or medical staff, to actually write about it. Untitled Chapter was a literary critic who died of prostate cancer. And he spent a whole chapter in this book called Intoxicated by My Illness, a whole chapter examining his physician.
Oh.
And he said it wasn't that he was bad. He was fine. But I wish that he had a little bit of humor. I wish that he would read my poetry from time to time. I wish he'd wrote for my spirit instead of my prostate.
Yeah.
To have the freedom to express the truth of your experience on paper. So out of the medical experience comes emotions, fears, hearing the diagnosis, waiting for transplant, waiting for treatment in the cancer community, waiting to get back, as I have all month long, the results of a test to see if I qualify for particular intervention in my heart failure. The waiting is a killer.
It is.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
And the emotions you feel during that period are all over the map. So all of those experiences can be turned into prompts. Sometimes gratitude is a really important one. Simply to write about what you're grateful for, because I think in the midst of illness and hardship, we lose sight.
We do.
And yet we know that there's plenty of research that a gratitude practice, simply I write every day, try to write 3 to 5 things I'm grateful for at the end of my writing time. And sometimes I scrape the barrel a little bit because I'm fresh out of gratitude. I really have to come up with something. And I do. And it helps me remember, wait a minute, sweetheart. You're doing fine. Your life is full. You have so much to be grateful for. And that's healing.
Absolutely.
It's healing.
And for you, Tamara, for you, was there a prompt that Sharon gave us that you found either difficult to do? Like the waiting one was very difficult for me to not so much write, but to experience as I was writing it. Or was there one that even the opposite that you felt was just so delicious to get out? It just felt good to express that.
The one that I really loved was, with the waiting one, I wrote, but I couldn't stop. And that was too long to read, so I didn't read that day. But the one that I love is the one that the prompt that she gave us, saying how we wanted to be remembered.
Yes.
I like that one very much.
I'm wondering, do you have that one in front of you? Would you be willing to read it for us?
Sometimes it's fun to read what you wrote in a 5-minute prompt against what you wrote more on later. But those little prompts, that short time opens you up, but you never finish in a 5-minute to 7-minute writing prompt. Never.
Okay, yes, I would like to share the one that says how I want to be remembered. And I wrote, I want to be remembered as the sweetest, kindest, funniest mom. Oftentimes, my kids would say that they wonder if anybody else's mom dances with them and sings and tells jokes and hugs them and squeezes them as tightly as me. No, would often be my response. I want to be remembered as a wife who loves her husband, who is incredible. He loves and works hard for his family and is a true man of prayer and strong faith. I want to be remembered as a kind and caring, strong and smart, and not too bad on the eyes. I want to be remembered as a survivor of diabetes at 16 years old in high school, a survivor of kidney disease, which kept me on dialysis for 5 years, a survivor of heart disease, which led me to a heart attack and also to come out of a 2-month coma where they said I wouldn't remember anything. I want to be remembered as an author, a storyteller who wrote about her whole ordeal, about what she has been through and how I overcame, and also as one who loves and believes in God and in prayers. That's what I wrote.
It's lovely to hear it again.
Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your stories and talking about our workshop that we did. Before we leave, I have a question to ask both of you that is not transplant related. So I'm going to ask Sharon first. Sharon, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
A weeping willow.
Amazing.
I don't know any trees that laugh. But my aunt years and years ago had immigrated to the United States from France, and they planted on their farm this wonderful weeping willow when she came to the country, that by the time I saw it as a youngster, it was this huge, beautiful, embracing. You could walk in and you've just felt embraced by this wonderful weeping willow. And I don't see many here.
Yeah.
They aren't good for the water main system, but
Right.
I love, and that would be my tree of choice.
Amazing. That's beautiful. I love those. They're absolutely stunning. And yourself, Tamara, what kind of tree would you be?
You might find this a little bit funny. Do you know the tropical fruit mangoes?
Yes, I love mangoes.
I would be a mango tree. We have lots of mango trees in Jamaica. You can eat mangoes and your belly will be full for the whole day. Because if it's ripe, oh, it's delicious. But if it's green, you can still eat it. You just put a little bit of salt and a little bit of black pepper, good to go. So if I think I was a mango tree, I'd never go hungry.
Amazing. I love that. That's fantastic.
How about you, Candice?
So it's funny. Everybody asks me at the end of the episode too. So I would be a birch tree, specific in Northern Ontario in the Kawarthas, because I spent my summers as a kid up in the Kawarthas, and birch trees just always bring me back to that beautiful space in Canada where we have lakes, and the smell of summer is just a birch tree to me. So that would be my tree of choice as well.
Beautiful.
I want to thank you both for being part of our episode today. You both bring so much joy to writing, and your stories and your journeys are both so powerful. And I'm so excited to read more of your writings, Tamara, and continue to learn with you, Sharon, through your workshops. And for those people who are listening right now who are interested, we do plan on having another workshop with Dr. Sharon Bray, and we will keep you all informed about when that is, because it's definitely something that I would recommend to anyone who wants to go through their journey and have some support through that, because Sharon has definitely helped myself and Tamara and others in the group in getting our feelings and our history down on paper. So thank you both so much. I really appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome, Candice.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to do this. It was wonderful to hear Tamara's whole story, which I hadn't heard only bits of before. And Candice, it's been a joy to work with you. So thank you so much. And I will leave you to it.
Thank you both for joining us and sharing your stories. We will talk to you soon on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Living Transplant podcast wherever you're accessing this today. Please share with your friends, and if you have ideas for future episodes, please reach out to us at livingorgandonation@uhn.ca. Thank you so much.